Right now, folded over the back of my chair here in Okinawa, there is a wool sweater with 3 small elbow patches, each one a slightly different shade of gray, and a row of neat stitching running along the collar where the wool had begun to unravel 2 winters ago. It was my father's sweater before it was mine. He wore it for perhaps 20 years, and I have worn it for nearly 30 more. By any honest accounting, this sweater is close to 50 years old. It has been mended more times than I can count on both hands. And it is, at this very moment, warmer and stronger than the sweater my grandson bought new from a shop in town 3 winters ago, a sweater that has already, in that short time, gone thin at both elbows and stretched shapeless at the collar. My name is Kenji Takara. I am 81 years old, and I have lived my whole life on the island of Okinawa, in the far south of Japan. My family did not have wealth to spare on clothing bought and discarded lightly. A good wool sweater, in the world I grew up in, was a serious possession. It took real money, real labor, real sheep and real hands to make one, and no household with any sense let one die simply because a moth had found it or an elbow had worn thin. My grandmother practiced something called Boro. The word means tattered, and it names both the damage and the beautiful, patient answer to it. Mending worn cloth with more worn cloth in small, deliberate stitches, layer upon layer, until a single garment might carry pieces from 3 generations of a family within it. Those old mended garments are so treasured today that museums now display them behind glass as art. My grandmother would have found that very funny. To her, it was simply what a sensible person did on a cold evening when a sweater had begun to wear through, and winter was not yet finished with us. But before I show you how, let me tell you the part that should make you a little angry. The clothing industry has spent the last 2 generations training you to see a hole in a sweater as a death sentence rather than a small, ordinary event to be mended. Walk into any clothing store and look at what wool sweaters are made of today. Very often a thin blend, heavy with synthetic fiber, machine knitted so tightly and cheaply that once a single thread lets go at the elbow, the whole row unravels before you can stop it, and there is often no honest way to mend it at all. The garment was never built to be repaired. It was built to wear through in 2 winters, precisely so that you return to the same store and buy the same sweater again. A sweater that can be mended and handed down for 50 years earns a clothing company nothing after the first sale. A sweater that dies reliably on schedule is a customer for life. That is the entire design, and no salesman will ever explain it to you in those words. Now, here is where almost everyone goes wrong when they first try to mend a worn sweater, and it is the reason so many people attempt one patch, watch it fail within a month, and declare the whole idea of mending old wool a waste of time. They try to mend wool the way they would mend woven cotton cloth, with a flat patch stitched over a hole, and it fails because knitted wool and woven cloth are not the same animal at all. Woven cloth is threads crossing over and under each other in a fixed grid. Cut it, and the edge holds reasonably still. Knitted wool is a single continuous thread, looped through itself again and again in interlocking rows. Cut it, or let a hole open in it, and the knitting unravels. The loops slip free of each other, and the hole grows wider every single time the garment is worn or washed, exactly the way a stocking runs. A flat patch sewn over the surface of a growing hole does nothing to stop that unraveling underneath it. The hole simply continues to spread beneath the patch until the patch itself has nothing left to hold on to, and it too falls away. This is the single reason most people's first attempt at mending wool fails completely, and it is also exactly why the old Japanese method works where a simple patch cannot. It does not merely cover the hole. It rebuilds the knitted structure itself, thread by thread, so the wool can no longer unravel at all. So before we thread a single needle, let us understand the tool that makes this rebuilding possible. And it is not a needle built for cloth at all, but one built for something else entirely. The tool is called a darning needle, or in the old Japanese sewing basket, simply a thick, blunt-tipped needle used for exactly this purpose. And its bluntness is not a flaw, it is the whole point. A sharp needle, pushed through knitted wool again and again, will split and damage the very threads you are trying to save. A blunt needle slides between the loops of yarn rather than piercing through them, leaving the surrounding knitting undisturbed while you rebuild the damaged section. A card of darning needles costs $2 or $3 at any fabric or craft shop, and one card will outfit you for a lifetime of mending. Alongside it, you need a small amount of matching or near-matching wool yarn, leftover yarn from any past knitting project, in knitted wool unraveled from a truly unsalvageable garment you were about to discard anyway, across the gap, or a small skein bought for $1 or $2. The hole will and most useful of all for a small hole work, something called a darning egg or darning mushroom, darning needle, a smooth, rounded, wooden, careful line of loose stitches small enough to fit inside the perimeter of the hole that you hold catching just the very edge of the sound, keeping the knitting on all sides and even, an eighth of rather an inch than bunching and from where the damage stitches. This is not decorative. An old light bulb, it is the anchor a smooth that stops the unraveling, or a wooden egg cup will all serve and the same every honest stitch purpose. That follows the shape matters far more than the material. Step 2. Now, the method itself, the first set of the old sewing baskets called simply position your darning egg, though the Japanese Boro tradition brought to it so the fabric and a beauty and slightly that turned repair into something close to art. Now, step working 1. From one stabilized edge to the other. Before run a series of straight stitches directly across the hole, side by side, each one entering the sound, knitting a small distance beyond the hole's edge on one side, and exiting the same small distance beyond the edge on the other, never anchoring only within the damaged area itself, always reaching into the strong, undamaged wool on both sides. Space these lines close together, almost touching, until the entire hole is spanned by a series of parallel threads, like the warp threads on a small loom. At this stage, the hole is bridged, but not yet solid. It will look a little like a tiny, orderly harp strung across the gap. Step 3. Weave the weft, the threads that make it whole. This is the heart of the old technique, and it is where a patient hand turns a bridge of loose threads into something as strong as the original knitting. Working now at a right angle to your first threads, weave your needle over and under those parallel lines, one row at a time, packing each row snugly against the one before it. Over, under, exactly as a weaver works a loom, exactly as my grandmother's fingers moved without her ever needing to look down at them. Row by row, moving steadily up the hole, this simple over and under weaving locks your first threads in place and builds, thread by interlocked thread, a small woven patch that is not sewn onto the sweater, but genuinely woven into the space where the sweater used to be. When you reach the top, secure your last stitches into the sound wool exactly as you began, and snip your yarn close. Hold the mended section up to the light when you are finished, and you will see something remarkable. A small, dense, woven square, slightly different in texture from the knitting around it, but every bit as strong, often stronger, for a woven patch does not run or unravel the way knitting can. In the old Boro tradition, this difference in texture was never hidden or apologized for. It was often emphasized, deliberately, with yarn in a contrasting color, so the men stood out proudly rather than trying to disappear. A small, honest record that this garment had been loved enough to save. Now, the extra layers, the refinements that separate a mend that holds for a single season from one that outlasts the rest of the sweater. First, reinforce before the hole ever fully opens. A thinning patch, the wisest an elbow gone visibly before sheer, there is truly a hole worn at all. Soft and loose can be reinforced with the very same weaving technique, worked directly over the thinning wool rather than across an open gap, adding a second layer of strength to fabric that has not yet failed. My grandmother reinforced elbows and cuffs on sight the moment she noticed the wool beginning to thin, and by doing so, she very often prevented the true hole from ever forming at all. Catch the whisper before it becomes a shout, exactly as I have taught you with tools and blades and fence posts. Second, match your yarn's weight, not only its color. A perfect color match matters less than most beginners assume. A woven mend in a slightly different shade has its own quiet charm. In the spirit of Boro, what matters more is weight. A thick, bulky yarn darned into fine, thin knitting will pucker and sit proud of the surrounding fabric, while thin yarn worked into heavy, bulky knitting will sag and fail to truly fill the gap. If your only available yarn is the wrong weight, you may split a thicker strand into finer plies or double a thin one to bring it closer to the weight of the wool you are mending. Third, felt small holes before they need darning at all. For the very smallest openings, a moth's single bite, a snag not yet fully through, a technique called wet felting can sometimes close the gap without a single stitch. A small amount of matching wool fiber, teased loose from a scrap or an old sock, laid gently over the hole from the inside, then worked with a few drops of warm soapy water and gentle repeated pressure of your fingertip in small circles, will very often felt itself directly into the surrounding wool, so the next fiber to fiber into a single solid patch, mended or not, from the outside, suffer far more from moths only on poor storage wool than from ordinary synthetic blends. Clean wool and only for the smallest of holes. But for those drawn to the oils and it is faster than any needle fabric, not to clean wool itself, and store it folded, never hung on a narrow hanger that stretches the shoulders out of shape over a season, ideally with a few pieces of dried lavender or cedar, both of which turn moths away naturally without any harsh chemical at all. Let me tell you now about my grandmother's mending basket, because it is where I first came to understand that a repaired thing could be more precious than a new one, not less. She kept a low woven basket beside her chair, filled with odds of yarn saved from every sweater our family had ever owned, sorted loosely by color and weight, waiting for its next assignment. On winter evenings, by the lamp, she would take up whatever garment had begun to complain to her, a thinning elbow, a small hole at a cuff, and she would work in that quiet, over and under rhythm for perhaps 20 minutes, hardly looking at her hands at all, while she spoke with whoever sat near her. I remember as a young man bringing her a sweater I was certain was finished, a hole at the elbow the size of a coin, worn through in a single hard season of farm work. She turned it over in her hands, found her darning egg, and had it mended before the tea had gone cold. The patch worked in a soft gray yarn, slightly different from the sweater's brown, visible if you looked, and utterly unashamed of itself. "A scar tells you a story was survived," she said to me once, holding up a much-mended sock to the lamplight. "A hole thrown away tells no story at all. It simply disappears, and so does the memory of everyone who ever wore it. I did not fully understand her then. I wear my father's sweater today, patches and all, and I understand her completely. And that is the larger truth beneath the needle and the yarn. We have been taught that a worn sweater's story ends the moment a hole appears. That damage means disposal, and disposal means a trip back to the very store that profits from your loss. But wool, real wool, spun from a real sheep and knitted by real hands or honest machines, does not want to die after 2 winters. It wants, if you will only give it the chance, to be mended, worn again, mended once more, and handed eventually to someone younger who will wear it into their own decades of memory. To take up a blunt needle and rebuild a whole thread by woven thread is not merely thrift, though the money saved on replacement sweaters is real and steady across the years. It is a small, deliberate refusal to let the throwaway world decide how long the things you love are allowed to last. That is Matanai, entire and complete. Waste nothing, not the wool, not the money, not the years of warmth still folded into an old sweater's weave, and not the story a well-mended garment is quietly allowed to keep telling. So tell me, in the comments below, where in this world do you live, and what worn sweater is folded at the back of your closet right now, waiting for someone to notice it is not finished yet? A hole at the elbow, a thinning cuff, a moth's small bite you have been meaning to mend for months? Tell me your place and your sweater, because I read every message that comes to me, and I would dearly love to know who among you threads a darning needle tonight and gives an old sweater 10 more years of honest warmth. And the next time we sit together, I will show you what my grandmother did with the very smallest scraps of yarn left over even from a lifetime of mending, pieces too short for any darning at all, gathered for years in the bottom of that same low basket, until one winter evening she showed me the humble, forgotten craft the old Japanese households built from nothing more than the last of the last. Until then, waste nothing, mend what wears, and remember always that the people who lived closest to the earth understood things that we, with all our full closets and all our half-empty mending baskets, are only now beginning to remember once again.